Hello friends, Jenkins Dota here, bringing you another Dota 2 video, and this one is going to be on 5 reasons that you're losing MMR in solo queue. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Number 5. You're playing while tired. In 2016, Microsoft did a study where they essentially took a group of people and had them do a number of non-trivial but simple tasks on a computer each day for a week or so. Each day, the respondents intentionally received less than 6 hours of sleep that night, so each consecutive day they were more and more tired than the last. Each day, they recorded the number of keystrokes and mouse strokes that it took each person to complete the tasks, and they discovered that each day of a poor night's sleep resulted in an exponentially worse performance the very next day in terms of both mouse and keystrokes. Needless to say, the tasks that Microsoft had their respondents complete are nowhere near as challenging as a game of Dota. So clearly playing Dota while tired will give you similar results to the findings of this study. Exponentially worse results the more tired you are. The problem with Dota, however, is that people, myself included, tend to stay up past their regular bedtime to binge queue until they win a game. This is just a trend. This sort of thing typically results in a tremendous amount of lost MMR because the more you lose, the more you want to win just one game. But the later you stay up, the more and more tired you'll get and the worse that you're going to play. It's a vicious cycle that should be avoided for the sake of your MMR. Number 4. You're queuing at a bad time. The majority of people who play Dota seem to be playing on a pretty similar schedule for whatever reason, and I don't know what the actual statistics are, but I imagine that the majority of gamers in general have a fairly similar schedule simply because society, at least in North America, runs on a 9-to-5 schedule. So even if gamers aren't in school or working a 9-to-5 schedule themselves, people around them usually are, so it makes it more likely that their schedule will be something similar. You can actually do a test yourself to see if there are a lot of people queuing in your region at a particular time. I would encourage you to try queuing for party queue at midnight versus around 3 a.m. and you're going to see a massive difference in queue time. You might not even find a game at 3 a.m. But the problem with solo queue is that no matter when you queue, you're going to get the same queue time because the pool of players is always going to be large enough to find you a game, but it's just much more likely that the game is going to be much lower quality than what you were used to in terms of behavior score, language preferences, and all of those metrics. And this is extremely dangerous territory for losing MMR. You're not going to be used to these games. Things are going to be really toxic, and it's just too dangerous. I would not queue at these times. I've seen so many people lose hundreds of MMR because they just don't know when to stop queuing at night, and I'm included in that. Sometimes you just feel like you want to keep queuing. In US East, the prime time to queue seems to be between 6 p.m. Eastern and 2 a.m. Eastern. That's the prime time. After that, you have no idea who you're going to run into, and things get really dangerous to queue. Number 3. You're picking your hero either too early or too late. Now more than ever, dominating the laning phase is an extremely important factor for having a huge impact in the game. Too many times do I see a support hold their pick until last pick, and then they just pick the same thing that they were highlighting the whole picking phase anyway. And on the flip side, I see cores greedily hold their picks when they already know exactly what they're laning against, and the hero they're highlighting is already extremely good in the game. This is bad drafting, and it's going to result in your other heroes getting completely hard counterpicked. Picks matter tremendously. If you do not pick to win in solo ranked, others are going to do it to you, and you're just going to lose more than you win based off of this simple fact. With that being said, what I would recommend is for supports to try and first and second pick the really overpowered supports in the current meta, so the supports that counter a lot of the meta cores. If you are a support and you force your cores to pick early, it's very likely that they're going to get counterpicked and have really bad lanes, and they won't be able to carry the game, and that's obviously not good. Cores, on the other hand, should be waiting until 3rd, 4th, and 5th pick to at the very least see what they're laning against. Pick something that lanes really well in the game, and if you can't, just make sure that your hero counters as many heroes on the enemy team as possible and can't really lose the lane. It may be quote-unquote tryhard, but pretty much all of the highest MMR players in North America do this simply because if they don't, people will do it to them. It basically has boiled down to simple game theory here. One person started doing this, and then their opponents started doing this, and then to have the same chance of winning, their opponents needed to do it, and it just kind of snowballed from there, and now it's become a necessity, and nobody even complains about it. Everybody counterpicks these days. It's just a necessity in solo queue. Number 2. You aren't using the mute features. First and foremost, I want to dispel the myth that being tilted somehow means that you're being toxic. Almost everybody can get tilted in some way, but not necessarily everybody becomes toxic. Some people get sad, some people get angry, some people become apathetic and they stop trying or they start screwing around. But in any case, no matter what your emotional response is, you don't want to let any of these emotions control your play, especially if they're being controlled by somebody else who's being toxic, whether they be your teammates or somebody on the enemy team. Conveniently, there are 3 mute features in the game to cover all bases depending on what mood that you're in. The way that I see it, there's essentially a triangle of tiltability, and as the triangle increases in size downwards, so does your level of tiltability. And there are 3 distinct levels in the triangle, one for each mute feature. On level 1, this is essentially where you're not super tiltable, but you may be tilted by one ally who is just insanely toxic, constantly calling GG and flaming teammates. The response to this level of tilt is to simply use the individual mute feature that's located in the scoreboard when you think somebody's going to behave like this. On level 2, this is the level where you may get tilted by flaming and ribbing coming from the enemy team. For example, if you die trying to kill somebody and the enemies immediately question mark you in all chat, if this will tilt you in your current mood, then make sure that you go into the options and turn on the mute all chat from enemies option. The bottom line is that your enemy should not be able to control how you play or make you play differently by chatting to you in all chat. You don't want to give them that advantage because you want to gain MMR. On level 3, this is kind of the ultimate level of tiltability. If you're in a really bad mood where basically anything will tilt you, whether it be a GG call from an ally or a question mark from an opponent, the response to this level of personal tilt is to go into the options and check the mute enemy chat option and check the mute all incoming chat option. This is essentially going to make it so the only way you can communicate in Dota is through pings, chat commands, and sound bites, which is honestly a pretty pleasant experience if you ask me. Depending on how I'm personally feeling, I use all 3 features interchangeably. For me personally, this is kind of the biggest thing on the list that I've used for gaining MMR in the past couple of weeks. Since I started using the mute features religiously, I've gained over 800 MMR. I would highly recommend this for anybody who finds themselves at all emotionally invested in a game of Dota. Number 1. The Gambler's Fallacy. According to Wikipedia, the definition of the gambler's fallacy is the mistaken belief that if something happens more frequently than normal during a period of time, then it will happen less frequently in the future. In terms of a real-life analogy, an example of this is if you flip a coin 10 times in a row and you get heads every time, you may think, wow, what are the chances? I'm definitely not going to get heads next time, that would be such a low chance. But really, the chances of getting heads that time is going to be exactly the same. It's still a 50-50, you're still just flipping a coin. And in Dota terms, the fallacy is the idea that if you're on a loss streak and you keep playing until you win, hey, you're more likely to eventually win because what are the chances that you keep losing? There's no way you can keep losing. Similar to flipping a coin, the chances of winning are still going to be the same, if not worse, because unless you're Gandhi, you're probably in a pretty bad mood because of the major loss streak that you're on. So as you play, it's actually going to get worse and worse, and clearly something in your formula isn't working. So if you're having a bad day, what I would recommend is just calling it quits. Don't risk queuing for more when something clearly isn't working. And I know that sounds counterintuitive. If you want to gain MMR, don't queue as much. But it's just so easy to fall victim to this gambler's fallacy. This is actually probably the #1 reason for huge MMR losses, at least in the 6 to 7k bracket that I've seen. I've seen people fall from 7k to 5.5k over a period of 3 days because they just won't stop queuing until they win, until they feel like they're back on that upswing. Remember guys, 200 MMR not lost is 200 MMR that you've saved. That's 200 MMR that you don't have to gain later. So if you feel like you're just on a downswing and you're going to keep losing, do not queue, because remember, it is a lot easier to lose MMR than it is to gain MMR. So that concludes this list, but if you guys enjoyed this content, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because that's going to let me know that essentially you want me to make more stuff like this, which I actually do have a lot of ideas. So thank you so much for watching, I do appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.